Hi, everyone. This is Arlen Salty, the co-director and co-founder of Break Forth Ministries. Before we jump into this episode, my wife Elsa and I would love to invite you to head over to breakforthministries.com, where you can find out about our live events, our tours to the Holy Land, resources, and so much more. And if you feel you'd like to help us out with the costs of putting Break Forth online out to the world for free, you can choose to support the ministry there as well. Don't feel pressure, but even $5 helps to keep us expanding this free library. Okay, let's get right to today's episode. In this session, we present Dr. Gary Chapman speaking on things I wish I'd known before we got married for singles. Whatever your age, now is the time to begin learning the skills you will need when you get married. Gary will help you learn how to have a healthy dating relationship and make a wise decision about marriage. Here is Dr. Gary Chapman.
Let's pray and ask God to guide our time together. Father, thank you for the opportunity to share and think about relationships. I thank you for every individual who's here. I know that you know us all by name, and you know everything about us. And I pray that during this time, your Spirit would touch our spirits, and that our hearts would be open to what we need to do to have better relationships. In the name of Christ, I pray. Amen. Anybody here ever lived in North Carolina where I live? Keep your hand up. Look at this girl. In case I need an interpreter. Ask her. What did he say? All right. Well, it's great to be with you. I do live in North Carolina. I work on a church staff. I've been on the same church staff for 41 years. Many years ago, I started our single adult ministry back when very few churches had a single adult ministry. I've worked with singles. I've worked with couples. Been involved in marriage and family counseling all these years on the staff. And today our focus is going to be on singles. How many of you are actually single? Okay. How many of you are married but you work with singles? Okay. Are there any other categories? Okay. At any rate, most of you are single, and that's who I'm talking to. This whole matter of preparation for marriage is a big deal. I looked in the scriptures and found that the word preparation or prepare is used over and over and over again in the scriptures. Let me just give you some examples. This is Joshua chapter 1, verse 10. Joshua commanded the officers of the people, saying, "Pass through the host and command the people, saying, prepare food supplies, for within 3 days you shall pass over this Jordan and go in to possess the land which the Lord your God gives you." I wonder what would have happened if they hadn't prepared food. He said, get ready. There's going to be a journey. Get your food ready. First Chronicles chapter 22 says David prepared for the building of the temple. He didn't build the temple. Remember, his son built the temple, but David prepared for the temple. He collected all the things that were going to be necessary. Second Chronicles 12:14. Rehoboam did what was evil because he prepared not his heart to seek the Lord. There's an example of someone who did not prepare his heart to seek God. The Levites were told over and over again to prepare for the various offerings and the various sacrifices. And Proverbs chapter 30, verse 25 says, the ants are a people not strong, but they prepare their food in the summer. So over and over again, in all settings, there's a big push on the preparation. So obviously, when you come to something as big as marriage, we ought to be doing some preparation for it. I believe that the decision to marry is one of the biggest decisions you'll ever make in your life, and it will have one of the most profound influences on you of any other decision you make. Who you marry and what you do in your relationship will profoundly affect how you invest your life. Now, what I want to suggest to you up front is that the time to prepare for marriage is not after you get engaged. Most of what the churches are doing, both in Canada and the U.S., Most pastors, maybe not most, but many pastors do require premarital counseling before they marry someone. And that's wonderful. I mean, I applaud that. But the reality is we should be preparing for marriage long before we get engaged. Because when you get engaged, you've already got your mind made up. I mean, you've already decided. You've already made this decision, and you're moving into it. And many times, couples, when they get to that point, are so living in such a euphoric state that they don't even hear what the pastor's saying. So what I'm going to suggest to you is that wherever you are now is the time for you to start preparing. You may not even be in a dating relationship, but if you ever hope to get married, now is the time you should begin preparing for getting married. So I want to, let me just give you the background. So I've been for 35 years, I've been counseling married couples and listening to all their struggles and all their pains and helping people work through marriage problems. And I really believe that many of them could have avoided a lot of the problems they encountered if they had prepared better for marriage. You know, we do a better job typically of preparing for our vocation than we do preparing for our marriage. That is, many people will spend 4 years in college and then spend a couple of years in grad school getting ready for a vocation and spend almost no time getting ready for their marriage. And maybe that's why people are more successful in their vocations than they are in their marriages. So what we're talking about is extremely important. About 3 years ago, I had been wanting to write a book specifically for singles for a long time because most of my books I wrote to married couples, the 5 love languages, the 5 languages of apology, anger and how to process anger. But I've been wanting to write a book for singles, but I knew in my heart that most single adults are not going to read a heavy academic book on marriage. It doesn't matter how great the author thinks it is, they're not going to read it. So I said to God, how can I write a book that singles will read and will give them practical help? And as soon as I prayed that prayer, the answer came in my heart. Why don't you do what you've always done? Write out of the overflow of your own life and out of the overflow of all the people you counseled through the years. So I did, and I gave it the title, Things I Wish I'd Known Before We Got Married. I asked myself, what are the things that I know now that had I known before I got married would have made my life much easier? And that's what I want to share with you this morning. The reality is that my wife and I were both Christians before we got married. We prayed about getting married. We believed it was God's will for us to marry. Besides that, we were in love. But 6 months after we were married, I was more miserable than I had been my whole life. And so was she. Because we did almost no preparation for marriage. I don't know if they had books on marriage back then, but I never saw a book on marriage. I don't know if pastors did premarital counseling, but the pastor that married us had one session with us. And I don't remember a thing he said. So we didn't have any preparation. We were in love. We were Christians. We believed it was God's will for us to get married. And I figured everything was going to go wonderful. But everything didn't go wonderful. And we struggled for a long time. And that's probably why I have so much empathy for married couples who are struggling. Because I know what it is to be married and thinking in your mind, I've married the wrong person. Because if I'd married the right person, surely it would not be this hard. So I have a lot of empathy, and that I think God has used. I think my pain God has used in helping me help other couples through the years. Because when they sit there and tell me how miserable they are, I can identify with that. I understand that. But I believe that if we had had some help before marriage, if we had learned some things before marriage, I believe it would have made our marriage much easier. Yeah, if you're coming in, just continue to come in. There's still a number of chairs here, so you don't have to stand. If you'll just walk down the aisle and look for them. There's a number of them right in this area over here. 2 right here. So, yeah, just keep coming in, walk toward the front, look for chairs, and be kind to let the people in, okay? Very good. All right, so let me share some of them with you. Number one, I wish I'd known that being in love is not an adequate foundation for a successful marriage. I really felt like that, love was going to carry us through. I remember when I went to my mother years ago and I said, Mom, how do you know when you're really in love? And my mother said what many mothers have said through the years. She said, son, if it's real, you'll know it. Now, I like my mother, but that didn't help me. But this in-love experience is a very common thing. Everybody eventually, well, I shouldn't say everybody, almost everybody eventually will fall in love. The way it starts is with a little tingle. There's a little love alert system in all of us. It's similar to a smoke alarm. And when you meet certain people, there's something about the way they look, about the way they talk, about the way they emote that gives you a little tingle inside. In fact, it's the tingles that actually motivate you to go out and have a dinner together. And maybe you've discovered that you can lose the tingles on the first date. You find out something about them that you can't tolerate, and the next time they call you for dinner, you're not hungry. And that relationship never gets off the ground. But other relationships, every time you go out to eat, it gets tinglier and tinglier and tinglier. And one night, here's what happens. One of you will say something like this. You know, I think I could love you. We're testing the waters to see if they feel what we feel. And if they give you a positive response, such as, what would be so bad about that? Ooh, you have a tender evening. And the next time the moon is right, you are likely to say the words, I love you. And you wait for them to say, I love you too. Woo! Now you know you got it because you said it out loud. And from that moment on, you literally get obsessed with each other. You can't get them off your mind. You go to bed thinking about them. You wake up thinking about them. All day long you think about them. They are the most wonderful person you have ever met in your life. Now, your mother can see their flaws, but you can't. Your mother will say, honey, have you considered they haven't had a steady job in 5 years? And you will say, Mama, give them a break. They're just waiting for the right opportunity. Now, I am not opposed to falling in love. I think it's a wonderful experience. But in describing it, the best way I know to describe it is to say it is an emotional obsession. I mean, you literally get obsessed with each other. They are the most wonderful person you've ever met. And this has been going on for all of human history. But the reason it's not the foundation for marriage is it's temporary. And nobody told me that. Nobody ever told me that. I thought if you've got the real thing, it'll be with you forever. And nobody told me. I know now, Dorothy Tenev, Bridgeport, Connecticut, long-term study on the in-love experience. And she found out that the average lifespan of the obsession is 2 years. Some a little longer, some a little less, average 2 years, and you will come down off the high. Now, thank God we come down off the high. Because if we didn't, you'd have to close down business, industry, church, education, because you can't get anything done when you're in love. Being in love is next door to being insane. If you're in college and you fall in love, your grades are likely to go down. Got a test on the War of 1812. Who cares about the War of 1812 if you're in love? But see, nobody told me that. Nobody told me I was going to come down off the high. And my wife and I had been in love almost 2 years before we got married. So pretty soon after the honeymoon, I came down off the high. She says she came down on the honeymoon. And within 6 months, I was realizing Mama was right. All those things Mama told me about her were right. And those things her friend told her about me were right. And I saw these things I didn't like about her. And I told her. And she told me. And within a year, we were wondering, why did we get married? I mean, we don't even like each other. Nobody told me that. I was totally disillusioned when I came down off the high. And that's when I started thinking, I've married the wrong person. And at first I was mad at God because I said, look, I prayed and I asked you, please don't let me marry her if she's not the right one, and you let me do it. I was mad at God. I wish somebody had told me that. I wish I had known that what I was going through is what every married couple goes through, but nobody told me that. So I'm telling you, you will come down off the high. You see, here's what happens with singles. Many times you fall in love and you get obsessed with each other and you date each other for 3 years and you come down off the high before you get married. And that's when people typically break up. And they say, well, I don't have the feelings anymore. I lost the feelings. Well, everybody loses the feelings. You either lose them before you get married, or you lose them after you get married. So I wish I had known that the in-love experience is temporary. If I had known it and been expecting it and knew that it was norm, then I would have been able to handle it, I think. Now, closely associated with that is the second one, and that is I wish I'd known that romantic love has 2 stages. It has the euphoric stage, which I've just described, which takes very little effort. But it has a second stage that is much more intentional. That is, you have to choose to love, and you have to learn to love. And that's where my book on the 5 love languages, how many of you read the 5 love languages? Yeah. That's where my book on the 5 love languages comes in. And I have an edition for singles if you haven't discovered that. But when you come down off the high, you're no longer pushed along with your emotions. You have to now learn how to love the other person. I was in the airport in Chicago, actually, some years ago, and I encountered a young lady that I had met before, a number of years before, and started talking with her and found out she was going to the Great Lakes Naval Training Center to visit with her fiance. And she asked me, what are you doing now? And I said, well, I do a lot of marriage seminars. And she said, well, what do you do at marriage seminars? I said, well, I help people work on their marriage. And I could see her eyes were just questioning. And she said, why do you have to work on a marriage if you love each other? And I thought to myself, this poor lady is exactly where I was when I was her age. She has the same thoughts that I had. If you love each other, you don't have to work on it. Surely you don't have to work on it. I'm telling you that love requires work. It requires effort. And many couples do not realize there are 2 stages, and many of them never learn how to express love to each other because they don't understand the love language concept that one person has one language, another person has another language. And I didn't know anything about that in the early years of my marriage, of course. And so what I did was what we do by nature. I spoke my language to my wife. Because my love language is words of affirmation. What makes me feel loved is when my wife or my children or anybody tells me, you did a good job. I really appreciate that. Da-da-da-da-da. That's what makes me feel loved. So that's what I did for my wife. And that's what most people will do. They will speak their own language. So I told her how much I appreciated what she did. I told her how nice she looked. I told her how happy I was that I'd married her. I told her probably a dozen times a day, I love you, honey. I mean, I can't tell you how much I love you. I love you, honey. I'd give her all these words, but that was not her love language. Her love language was acts of service. Do things to help me. Take out the trash, wash the dishes, vacuum the floors, mow the grass, wash the car. And I didn't do anything to help her. I was in grad school. That was my full-time thing. I was in grad school, I didn't do anything to help her. So it was just a matter of time. She said to me one night, you keep on saying, I love you, I love you. If you love me, why don't you help me? And I was blown out of the saddle because in my mind, I was doing the best I could. I thought I was loving her. I thought any woman would be loved if their husband told them all the time, So I wish I'd known that there were 2 stages, and I wish I'd known about the 5 love languages. and that people have different love languages, and that you have to learn to speak the other person's language. But nobody told me that. I had no concept of that. And consequently, as I said, we went downhill in our marriage. A third thing that I wish I'd known is that the old saying, like mother, like daughter, like father, like son, is not a myth. I say to the young lady, if you're dating a guy, spend some time with his father, because in 10 years, he'll be about like his father. And if you're dating a young lady, look at her mother and get around her mother, because in 10 years, she'll be pretty much like her mother. If his father's an alcoholic, there's a good chance in 10 years he'll be an alcoholic. If her mother interrupts her husband when he's telling a story, and she said, "No, honey, it wasn't Thursday night, it was Friday night. No, honey, that wasn't 1973, that was 1974. If she interrupts him when he's telling stories, that's probably what she's going to do. She's going to interrupt you. Now, when I say that, singles will say to me, "Wait a minute, Dr. Chapman, you don't mean I have to turn out to be like my father?" And my answer is no, you don't. But if you're not going to turn out to be like your father, now is the time for you to be working on that. If your father's an alcoholic, you need to study alcoholism, and you need to study stress, and you need to learn how to handle stress without turning to alcohol. Because if you just do what comes natural, the default mode, you're going to do the same thing your daddy did when you get under a lot of stress, and you're going to tell yourself, "Now I know why daddy drank." And you're going to end up on that same road. So here's what I suggest. If you're seriously dating somebody, whether you're thinking marriage yet or not, spend some time with their parents and observe how they relate to each other and observe their lifestyle. For example, if his father goes golfing every Saturday, he goes to play golf. It's a pretty good chance in 10 years he'll be golfing every Saturday. So if you don't think you can live with that, you've heard of golf widows, ladies that are married but they feel like a widow because their husband playing golf all the time. So you look at those things and you discuss them beforehand, and you make some decisions beforehand, because I don't mean obviously that every son's going to turn out to be like his father. I don't mean that, nor vice versa. But I do mean that we are greatly influenced by our parents' model. And so discovering that model, here's what I suggest to young men. Even if you're not dating, here's what I suggest to you. Make a list of all the things you admire about your father, all of his good traits. Make a list of them, things that you'd really like to emulate. And then make a list of the things that you do not want to emulate, things about your father that you really don't like, and you really don't want to be like that. If your father loses his temper and yells at your mother periodically, you write that down. I don't like that about my father. I don't want to be yelling at my wife 20 years from now. And then whatever the things are on the negative side, you begin working on those things. You begin learning about those things. And the ladies, I suggest you do the same thing about your mother. What are the things I like about my mother? What are the things I'd like to emulate? And what are those things that I don't want to turn out to be like that? That is one thing I don't like about my mother. And begin working on those things. Now's the time to do that. Because if you just ignore all of that, you'll likely drift into similar patterns to what your parents had. The next one is, I wish I'd known how to solve disagreements without arguing. First of all, when I got married, I didn't think we'd have any disagreements. Because when you're in love, you don't have a whole lot of disagreements. And when you're in love, you do almost anything. You know, she wants you to swim the river for her, you swim the river. You climb the mountain. You do whatever, it's just, when you're in love, you can't imagine that you're going to have conflicts. Wherever she wants to go to eat's fine with me, whatever I want to do is fine with her. When you're in love, you're just pushed along by your emotions. But the reality is every couple has conflicts. There are no marriages where people don't have conflicts for one simple reason. We're all human. And humans don't have the same thoughts. And humans don't have the same emotions. And you're going to disagree on a number of issues when you get married. Now, I can't tell you what they are, but there's going to be a whole bunch of them that are going to come through a lifetime simply because you're human. Every couple has conflicts. The tragedy is that many couples don't know how to solve conflicts without arguing. And I didn't. I had no idea how to solve conflicts. So if you don't have any plan for handling conflict, what happens when you have a conflict? Well, first of all, you know that your idea is right. Otherwise, you wouldn't have it. I mean, you wouldn't be thinking that if it weren't right. It's right to you. But your spouse has the same concept, that their idea is the right idea. So what do you do if you have no plan for solving differences? First of all, you explain it to them. But if they don't agree with you, you explain it again. And then if they don't agree with you, you explain it one more time, because you know in your mind that anyone with common sense would know that what you're saying is right. And so what happens is she does the same thing you do, and you end up arguing with each other. And you end up often yelling and screaming and telling people how stupid they are and how could you believe that? And here we are. We were so in love, and here we are now cutting each other down and telling each other how stupid they are, and we end up arguing. And there are couples who spend 30 years arguing with each other. And sometimes one of them will win an argument, and the other will say, okay, you're right. But if you win the argument, they lost. It's no fun to live with a loser. So why would you want to do that? But most people have no plan for solving conflicts. But this is something you can learn wherever you are. Because if you're in college and have a roommate, I can tell you, you're going to have conflicts. If you have parents, I can tell you, you're going to have conflicts with your parents. If you have siblings, I can tell you, you're going to have some conflicts with your siblings. You got plenty of opportunity to practice solving conflicts. Now, I'm not going to go into depth in this because that's a whole topic. But at the very heart of solving conflicts without arguing is learning how to listen empathetically. And most of us don't know how to do that. We've never been trained, and we've never tried it. Most of us listen long enough to get an idea in our own mind, and we come back and we shoot their idea down. In fact, one research project said that the average person will listen to someone talk for 17 seconds before they interrupt and give their idea. You're never going to solve conflicts by interrupting people. We have to learn to listen. And what I encourage couples to do is to take turns listening. Why don't you take 5 minutes, or if you need it, take 10, and share your perspective on this. And I'm going to imagine that I have elephant ears, and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to listen to you. And I'm going to ask you some questions to clarify what you're saying, because I really want to know what your perspective is. I want to hear why you think what you think, and I want to hear how you feel and why you feel that way. And if you take that perspective that you are trying to see the world through their eyes, you're not trying to win an argument here. You're trying to understand how the other person could think what they think and how they could feel what they feel. And if you will try that, it's not that difficult if you focus on doing it. And you hear them out for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever you agree to, then you can honestly say, I think I hear what you're saying. And it makes a lot of sense. And it always makes sense in their head. Given their personality and given the way they are interpreting the situation, it always makes sense in their head. And you can honestly say what you're saying makes a whole lot of sense. Now, let me share my perspective. And then you take 5 minutes or 10 minutes and you share your perspective. And if they also are learning to listen empathetically and they will ask you questions to clarify, in 5 or 10 minutes, they can honestly say to you, well, I hear what you're saying. And that also makes a lot of sense. So how can we solve the problem? And you spend your energy looking for a solution rather than spending your energy trying to convince them that they're wrong and you're right. And solving conflicts takes you down the road to a good marriage. But when you don't resolve conflicts, and here's what happens with most couples, they don't resolve anything. They argue, but then somebody walks out of the room and they drop it, and that conflict goes under the rug. And you get a lot of conflicts under the rug, and that's when you get the idea we're not compatible. You hear married couples say that. We're not compatible. We shouldn't have gotten married. We're too different. Well, the reality is they're two humans who married each other but never learned how to solve conflicts. So they've got all these unresolved conflicts, which leads them to the conclusion that they're not compatible. The reality is all those conflicts can be resolved if they learn how to resolve conflicts. But as I said, I had no clue on how to resolve conflicts. So we ended up arguing, and we spent a lot of our time arguing. And neither one of us liked it. I mean, nobody likes an argument, and it doesn't lead anywhere good. But again, I wish I had learned that before we got married. And you can learn that. This is a skill you can learn right where you are. I wish I had known that apologizing is a sign of strength. Dr. Jennifer Thomas and I wrote a book called The 5 Languages of Apology, in which we discovered that people have different ideas about what it means to apologize. And 10% of the population, we discovered, almost never apologizes. And most of them are men. And most of them learned it from their fathers. Their fathers said, real men don't apologize. Now, you know where their fathers got that? John Wayne, that great theologian. And there are others of us, like myself, my father never told me that. But I never saw my father apologize. I had no model of apology. I remember as a kid, I would be in the back seat of the car, and my mother and father would be in the front seat, and my father was driving, and they would discuss something, and my father would get upset with my mother, and he would give her some harsh words driving down the road. And I'm in the back seat as a kid just cringing when I hear my father talking to my mother like that. My mother never responded. I assume, looking back on it, that she had just figured it's better not to talk back because it'll escalate. So she just sat there and listened and didn't respond, which incidentally is not a good way to solve conflicts either. So I heard that, but I never, ever heard my father apologize to my mother. I'm not saying he didn't. Maybe he did in private, but I never heard him apologize. So I came into marriage with no model of apology. It just wasn't a part of who I am. And yet, because I'm human, I did things that hurt my wife. I treated her unkindly. I said unkind things to her. But it wasn't natural for me to apologize because I never learned how to apologize. The reality is you will never have successful relationships without learning to apologize. For one simple reason. All of us are sinners. And all of us sin. There are no perfect husbands, and there are no perfect wives. And if we don't learn to apologize in a marriage, we will never have a successful marriage. We can stay together, but it won't be a successful marriage. There'll be a barrier between us. Because you see, when I treat my wife unkindly, whether it's verbally or otherwise, it puts a block in a wall between the two of us. And if I don't deal with that block, the passing of time will not remove the block. It'll stay there. And then there's another failure and another block, and then another block. And a lot of married couples have a long wall, high and thick, between the two of them, on both sides. He has failed her, she has failed him, and they have these parallel walls. And it's hard to talk through a wall. So a lot of married couples live in the same house and try to be civil. It's like they're roommates in the same house. They don't have a successful marriage. The only way to have a successful marriage is to tear down the wall and then learn how to apologize. And what we discovered is that people do have different ideas of what it means to apologize. And they typically learn those ideas from their parents. If little Johnny pushes his sister down the stairs and his mother says, "Johnny, don't do that to sister. Go tell her you're sorry," he will go say to his sister, "I'm sorry," even if he's not. "I'm sorry." He's 32 now. He's married. If he offends his wife, what will he say? "I'm sorry." That's what he thinks an apology is. But she grew up with different parents, and she may have a different idea. So when he says, "I'm sorry," she may well be thinking, "You certainly are. Is there anything else you'd like to say?" She's waiting for him to say, "I was wrong, honey. I should not have done that." Never crossed his mind to say I was wrong. He said, "I'm sorry." That's what apology is to him. So you have to learn that people have different ideas of apology, and you can find this easily in a dating relationship. You can find this actually in other relationships, and discover what they consider to be an apology and learn how to express that apology in a language that will be meaningful to them. It's very similar to the love language concept. We have to learn the other person's love language. We have to learn the other person's apology language so that we can do it effectively. But I wish I'd known that. I had no clue of that. I wish I'd known that forgiving is not a feeling. Forgiveness is not a feeling. See, my wife would apologize to me, and I would tell her that I forgave her. But I would live with the pain and the hurt for weeks. And I would remember what she said. And the words would come back, and I would hurt again over the words. And I was troubled in my own heart as a Christian because I thought, I thought I forgave her, but apparently I didn't, because I've still got it in my mind and I'm still having all these emotions. And I didn't realize that forgiveness does not destroy the memory, and forgiveness does not remove emotions. Everything that's ever happened in your life is recorded in your brain. And from time to time, things in the past that are not in your conscious mind at the moment will come back to the conscious mind. And you'll remember the words they said or the things they did. And when you remember, the pain comes back. I didn't know that. And so I was condemning myself for not having forgiven her. I was feeling, well, I'm not where I should be. I shouldn't be feeling this again. Well, the reality is that forgiveness is not a feeling. Forgiveness is a choice. It's a choice to lift the penalty and pardon you for what you did. I'm no longer going to demand that you serve 10 years in prison for what you did to me. I'm no longer going to make you suffer for what you did to me. Forgiveness is a choice to lift the barrier, remove the barrier, and let you into my life again so that we can go on building this relationship. It's a decision to pardon the person. It does not remove the memory, and it does not remove the emotions. I wish I'd known that. It would have saved me a lot of internal struggle if I had understood that forgiveness is not a feeling. Then I wish I'd known that toilets are not self-cleaning. 6 weeks into our marriage, I said to my wife, "Honey, the toilet's dirty." And she said, "I know. I was wondering when you're going to clean it." And I said, I don't know how to clean toilets. And she said, "I can teach you." You see, I grew up in a house where the toilet was always clean. But I don't know who cleaned it. I don't know if my father cleaned it or my mother cleaned it. I don't remember ever seeing either one of them clean it, but it was always clean. But I went into marriage with the idea that my wife would clean the toilet. But apparently she went into marriage with the idea that I would clean the toilet. So we had a dirty toilet. Now, what I'm saying in that chapter is not simply toilets. What I'm talking about is deciding before you get married who will do what. And it would be good to do this little exercise now. Even if you're not dating, you can do this. Make a list of all the things that you think will have to be done once you get married. For example, somebody will have to buy food, somebody have to cook food, somebody have to wash dishes, somebody have to vacuum floors, somebody have to clean the toilet, somebody have to get the white spots off the mirror, somebody have to walk the dog if you have one, somebody have to mow the grass perhaps, someone have to clean the car. I mean, just list all the things that you can think about that would have to be done when you get married. And then sit down and put your initials by the ones you think you will do. And then if you're in a serious dating relationship, the other person does the same thing, and they put their initials by the ones they think they will do, and they put your initials by the ones they think you will do. And then in a dating relationship, you pull together and look at that, and maybe you agreed on half of them, or maybe even 2/3 of them. But on the other third, he thought you were going to do it, and you thought he was going to do it. Now's the time to negotiate that, not after you get married. You negotiate that now. Who will clean the toilets? And it doesn't mean that you're locked into that forever, but it does mean you go into marriage on the same page. See, my wife agreed before we got married, for example, that she would keep the books, that she would make the payments every month and balance the checkbook. And we agreed on that. There's a whole lot of other things we didn't agree on, like the toilet, but we had agreed on that. But 6 months into our marriage, she said to me one day, "Honey, would you mind doing this?" And I said, "Well, I could. Yeah, I don't mind." And I said, "Why?" She said, "It hurts my stomach." You see, I was in grad school and we had almost no money. And she was trying to decide every month, well, how much do I pay on this bill and this bill? And it was hurting her stomach. And before long, she had stomach ulcers. It's pretty bad to be married. In the first year, you have stomach ulcers, you know. So what I'm saying is, even before you're in a serious relationship, you can still do this so that you have in your mind already very clearly the things you think you'll do and the things you think your spouse will do. And then when you get around to getting serious in a relationship, you can negotiate those things. But the time to negotiate them is before you get married, not after you get married. Then, I wish I'd known that we needed a plan for handling our money. We didn't have any plan. Of course, we didn't have any money either. First 3 years. So it wasn't really much of a problem first 3 years because all the money we had just went to pay the electric and, all that stuff. But once we began to make money, it became a problem because we didn't have a plan. There was one thing we agreed on, and it was not a problem for us in this area, and that was we had both agreed to give 10% to God. I mean, I did that for years as a single, and my wife did that as a single. So we didn't have any problem with that. We both agreed we'd give 10% of whatever we had to God. But the rest of it is where the disagreements came. Really, there's only 3 things you can do with money. You can give it away, you can save it, or you can spend it. That's all you can do with money. So the plan ought to involve how much are we going to give away, how much are we going to save, and then how we're going to spend the rest of it. And typically, it's how we're going to spend the rest of it where you get into more conflicts. And I suggest to couples, I suggest to singles, where you are, that you should have a budget. You should have a budget. And if whatever monies you have and whatever expenses you have, you ought to take some time to lay it out on how you're using that. What percentage you're giving to God, what percentage you're saving, and how you spend the rest of it. What is it going for? Now, when couples get to thinking about marriage, and you can do this earlier also, talk to a couple who's been married for about a year and ask them to share with you what it costs to live in the apartment where they live. And then what are the utility costs? What's the electric bill every month? Get some realistic idea in your mind of how much money it costs just for the essentials. And then talk to them about how much money do y'all spend on clothing? And how much money do y'all spend on recreational things like movies or going to a sports event or something like that? And how much money do y'all spend on groceries? And how much money do you spend eating out? And get them to help give you a realistic idea of what it costs to live together as a couple on the level where they're living. And what you might discover as a couple, that you can't realistically live the way they're living, because you're not going to be making that much money the first year of your marriage. So you might have to decide you're going to have to live in a basement apartment rather than in a real apartment. And you may have to decide, we can't eat out. We're going to have to do hot dogs and hamburgers. We can't eat out for the first year until I get out of grad school or whatever. But what I'm saying is, as singles, we can learn a lot about money management, and we can begin to have a plan for our own. But then when you get serious about relationship in a marriage, you have to blend those two plans. And often what happens is you have a spender who marries a saver. And the saver wants to save 10% or whatever, and the spender doesn't have any savings. They spend everything they get. And then there's a whole thing about debt. And the only thing I can say about debt is it's bad. Debt is bad. When you spend more money than you take in, you're like the American government, and you're in trouble. And the time to learn that is when you're single. Now, I hope, those of you that are single and in college, I hope that your parents have not given you a free ride on the credit card. That you just charge whatever you want to every month and they pick up the tab and you don't even know what you spent. I hope that's not the case, because if that's the case, they're setting you up for trouble in this area when you get married. Because it doesn't work that way. Nobody's going to pick up the tab on your credit card and pay it for you after your parents turn you loose. And that's a bad habit to get into when you're single. The old thing of live within your means is a key principle to apply as a single as well as a married couple. So I wish I'd known more about money. Wish I had a plan for handling money. I wish we had talked about a plan for handling our money, but we didn't. I wish I'd known that mutual sexual fulfillment is not automatic. I thought that when a boy married a girl and they were in love, that the sexual part would just take care of itself. It'd just be natural. I thought that she'd want to have sex every night, just like I did. That's what I thought. I thought every night about 10:30 we'd be going to bed together. Woo! I could hardly wait. Every night. But I found out that she had a different idea about that. And that mutual sexual fulfillment, which is what God designed, is something that takes time. Ever wonder why God said to ancient Israel, when a man gets married, he shall not go to war for 1 year, and he shall not do any business for 1 year, but he shall learn to pleasure his wife. No war and no work. Take a year for your honeymoon. And to be very honest with you, not many married couples find mutual sexual fulfillment in less than a year. It takes time to learn how to pleasure each other. I wish I'd known that, because I thought we were abnormal. But the reality is it takes time, because males and females are extremely different when it comes to sexuality. So somewhere along the line, I hope you're learning, if you're a male, I hope you're learning about female sexuality. And if you're a female, I hope you're learning about male sexuality. And people have said to me, Gary, why do you think God made us so different? And the only reason I can figure is that God intended sex to be an act of love in which each of you were looking out for the other's interest. And if we don't make it an act of love, if we just focus on our own pleasure, we may never find mutual sexual fulfillment. And you may know that this is an area where many couples end up going for counseling because they can't get it together. But he made us different so that if we don't make it an act of love, it won't work. But if we come with the attitude of, honey, I want to learn how to pleasure you, then we make it an act of love and we find mutual sexual fulfillment because we do learn how to bring each other pleasure. And this is an important part of marriage. I wish I'd known that I was marrying into a family. I didn't have that idea. My wife and I got married, and 2 weeks later, we moved 1,200 miles away. I thought it was going to be like that forever, just the two of us. Go out in the prairie and set up a little house, and just the two of us. Happy forever. But the reality is that she had a mother. Now, in my case, she did not have a father. Her father had died. I knew her father earlier, but I never really got close to her father. But she had a whole bunch of brothers. She had a sister. She came from a family of 10. And what I'm saying to you is, if you ever get married, you're going to marry into a family. And she'll have a mother and a father. She might have a stepmother and a stepfather. She might have stepbrothers and sisters. And I'll guarantee you she'll have an Uncle George that messes up every social event you have. And what I'm saying to you is, in the dating process, don't let it just be a thing with the two of you. Spend some time with her extended family. If you have a chance to go to a family reunion or a holiday thing or whatever, go and find out what you're getting into. Now, she can't control the kind of family she has. You know, we don't choose our family. But when you get married, you gotta relate to them. Now, yeah, you can sometimes have a long distance relationship. If you can stay 1,200 miles away, it'll be long distance, and you probably won't have a whole lot of problems. But many times you're going to be living in the same town, and they are going to have expectations, and you're going to have expectations, and you're going to have conflicts in that area. So this whole matter of realizing that you're marrying into a family, and you're going to have to relate to that family. You can have a terrible relationship with them, or you can have a good relationship, or you can have a long-distance relationship, but you are going to have a relationship with his or her family. And I just wish I'd have spent a little more time getting to know her family and not discovering all of that after I got married. And then I wish I'd known that spirituality is not to be equated with going to church. You know, if one of the singles in our church comes to me and says, tells me that they're thinking about getting engaged, one of the things I will say to them, I'm just talking about informal conversation, I'll just say, well, are they a Christian? And often they will say something like, oh, yeah, he goes to St. Mark's. And I'm thinking, this is not good. He goes to St. Mark's. See, there's all kind of Christians. Are they a Christian doesn't give you much information. There are Sunday morning Christians, and there are daily devotional Christians. And those two people are very different. So when you get into a dating relationship, don't ignore the spiritual dimension of the relationship. Because if you're not close enough together spiritually, I can tell you this is going to be a huge area of conflict. Because spirituality impacts all the rest of life, and especially Christianity. If you have a vital relationship with Christ, it affects everything. It affects your attitude toward money. It affects your attitude toward sex. It affects everything. And that's why it's so important that we're on the same page spiritually. I remember my daughter, who didn't get married until she was 31, My son didn't get married till he was 34. People would ask him, when are you going to get married? And he said, when you grow up in the home of a marriage counselor, you're very careful. But our daughter met a guy in med school and dated him for 3 years and fell in love, had all those euphoric feelings. And he was a fine young man. And he told her he was a Christian. But the further they went along in that relationship, the more she realized that they were not the same kind of Christian. They weren't marching to the beat of the same drummer, because her heart was passionate about following Christ, and his was pretty much an Easter and Christmas thing. Remember the day she called home and she said to her mother, Mom, could you possibly get your friend, one of your friends that has a place down at the beach, could you possibly get me a place to go this weekend? I need to get away because I have just made the hardest decision of my life. And her mother said, what's that, honey? And she said, I broke up with my boyfriend. Because I just realized that we're not marching to the beat of the same drummer. And I've seen no movement spiritually in him while we've been dating. And I just need to get away because I'm hurting. So my wife got her a place and she went to the beach. Well, the next morning she got up and she walked out on the balcony of this condominium and looked down on the sand on the beach. And someone had been out early that morning and had written in the sand, Isaiah 41:10. Well, she runs for her Bible. And she opens the Bible to Isaiah 41:10, which says, Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with my righteous right hand. She called home and she said, I'm ready to come home. I got what I need. That's hard. If you're in love, it's hard to break up with somebody. But she was realistic. And she realized that even though he was a upright person and, he really wasn't the kind of Christian she was. And 2 years later, 3 years later, I guess, maybe 4 years later, she married a guy that's on the same page, and they have a wonderful relationship. So don't underestimate this, and don't think, well, it'll work out. It'll work out later, or they'll come to Christ, and da-da-da-da. If you don't see any movement, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be socially involved with non-Christians, but if you don't see any movement toward God, and they don't have any interest in growing in their relationship with God, that's a huge red flag waving that you best not walk too far down that road. And then I wish I'd known that personality profoundly influences behavior. I didn't know much about personality. I knew the word, and I knew that we have different personality types, but I hadn't spent a lot of time in that because it was later on that I did my study in counseling. But there's all kind of personality differences. They're morning people and they're night people, and they're not going to change. See, I dreamed when I got married that we would have, in the morning, we'd have breakfast together, and we'd have devotions together. We'd pray together in the morning. I didn't realize that my wife was not a morning person. She had told me when we were dating, don't ever call me in the morning. But I didn't get it. And after I got married, I realized that we're never going to have morning devotions together. This woman doesn't even know who God is in the morning. And then there are people that are very organized, and there are people that are not organized, and they often marry each other. Now, I'm not saying that you have to have the same personality. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that you ought to explore all these personality differences before you get married so that you know and learn how to relate to each other. Some have a very high level of being a controller. I mean, if they walk into a room like this and they don't like the lighting, they go change the lighting. And they walk into a situation, they see something that needs to be done, they go do it. I mean, and there are other people that would never do that. They're not going to touch something unless somebody asks them to touch something. Well, you know, if you're a controller and the other person, well, if the other person's a controller, you're going to fight a lot because you're going to go fix it and they're going to fix it after you. So you know, I say take a personality test. If you're in a dating relationship, take a personality. In fact, as a single, you're not even dating. Take a personality test and find out who you are. What are your patterns? And any personality test will give you some picture of what your personality patterns are like. But it's important for you to understand that. Well, all right. God bless you. You're dismissed. Hope you enjoy your next session. Thank you. Thank you.
We are so grateful for these great tips that Dr. Gary Chapman shared with us in this session. If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Gary Chapman, please head on over to 5lovelanguages.com. Thank you again for listening. We're adding more and more to this free online library of great sessions all the time. So remember to check back to see all the new content. And also remember, please head on over to breakforthministries.com where you'll learn more about our live events, Breakforth Holy Land tours, and so much more. Okay, we'll catch you again for more sessions at Breakforth Online.